Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national television channel about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, India's engagement with key strategic partners around the world, and how India is helping to shape a better world order. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking up India's relationship with a very important special strategic partner, South Korea, and South Korea's evolution as an Indo-Pacific power. And to discuss the importance of South Korea for the Indo-Pacific region and especially from a bilateral and regional point of view with India, I have a very distinguished scholar joining me from Kongju National University in South Korea, Dr. Eunjung Lim.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Professor Lim, thank you so much for joining Indian Diplomacy. It's an honor to have you. To begin with, South Korea has come up with a new Indo-Pacific policy. And this has caught a lot of attention in India because in the past it used to be thought that South Korea is a weak link in the Indo-Pacific strategy of the US alliance system. But now South Korea has its own strategy and it matches the strategies of many other countries, including India's own vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. So I'd like you to start by telling our audiences why South Korea has come up with its own Indo-Pacific strategy and what is the thinking and what kind of regional and global factors have played into the shaping of South Korea's Indo-Pacific policy.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for raising a very important question. Yes, we have been very much pragmatic, I will say, because, Korea, of course, its size, geographic size, physical size is not that big, but we do have a pretty decent number of population, and based on the manufacturing and free trade this country has developed, and then we accumulated our wealth, which means the best condition, best environment for the South Korea-like merchant and a trader country. Again, the superpower, their relationship should be friendly too. Otherwise, we cannot, our choice, again, our diplomatic choices will be pretty much narrowed because, as we all know, South Korea still faces furious challenges from the North Korea. So as long as, we have this very deep conventional security threat from the other side of the peninsula, we definitely need to prioritize our security, even though we want to be more pragmatic with more superpower, but still, again, this conventional, traditional security reason is still there. And in addition to that, US, China, again, their strategic competition has been increasing and increasingly serious, especially in the field of new technology. And having had that structure changing, in addition to that, again, Russia invaded Ukraine last year, and we all realize that this kind of thing can happen even in the middle of 21st century.
Yeah, and Professor Lim, you mentioned North Korea, and obviously that is an overwhelming threat that South Korea faces, and for various historical and emotional reasons. But the broader region, the Indo-Pacific strategy of South Korea is not just limited to the Northern Pacific. It talks about Southeast Asia, South Asia, Pacific Island states. So there seems to be a broadening of the strategic focus of South Korea beyond just North Korea, isn't it? And earlier administration of President Moon Jae-in had something called the New Southern Policy. And now we have this Indo-Pacific strategy. So is South Korea looking to play a bigger role in the broader Indo-Pacific? And if so, is it moving out of the US shadow and trying to play a more independent or a more forceful role in the region, you think?
Well, again, as you highlighted, our previous government, the Moon Jae-in government, they also suggested, new Southern policy, and they also prioritized the relationship with the ASEAN countries or Southeast Asian countries like India. I think this is a very natural evolution. Again, as a merchant and as a trader, South Korea has been always looking for good, friendly market, and the place we want to invest more. So in that sense, again, of course, China, the economic rise of China has been a fortune to the Korea's economic wealth. Definitely, having had the rise of China, I think South Korea could be able to, again, develop further. So now, South Korea is one of the top 10 richest countries in the world. But again, we still want to maintain a good relationship with China, but gradually the market or how they conducted their policy has been gradually more and more risky to the Korean industry. And of course, the international environment changed a lot too. So having said that, definitely ASEAN and India-like countries, this is a fascinating market to the South Korea. Again, India now is the most populous country in the world. It surpassed China's position very recently. Not only that, again, India is the largest democracy in the world, which means we can understand better. Again, our regimes are much more compatible. And militarily too, again, the Korea is of course a part of the Eurasian continent, but we are disconnected as long as North Korea is there. And as long as we don't have infrastructure connectivity with the Eurasian continent, South Korea is like an island. So it's very natural for us to go out again, through the maritime, the sea lane, and the maritime security. Those things are naturally important for Korea. Again, our energy, for example, 90%, more than 90% of our oil, gas, those things are traveling along the sea lane, which starts from the Persian Gulf and Malacca Strait, South China Sea, East China Sea. Again, the maritime security is super crucially important for this island-like country. So definitely in that sense, South Korea, I think it's very natural for South Korea to think about bigger role or more those responsibility in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right. So South Korea is looking to take greater responsibility in the Indo-Pacific, says Professor Eunjung Lim. Viewers, apart from the Indo-Pacific policy, there's also the US alliance. And on that front, South Korea has been strengthening the US alliance and also patching up with Japan. And these are big developments. And I'd like you to hear a very important set of reports, watch these reports on the coming together of the old allies, US, Japan and South Korea. And let's hear this and continue the discussion.
Sure.
The United States held joint air exercises bilaterally with South Korea and Japan involving strategic bombers on Sunday. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the exercise demonstrated the Allies' overwhelming defense capabilities and readiness posture. The South's military said in a statement that the exercise, quote, affirmed the United States' ironclad commitment to the defense of the Korean Peninsula. In a separate exercise, Japan flew F-15s over the Sea of Japan with US bombers, Japan's defense ministry said in a statement, calling the security environment, quote, increasingly severe.
Leaders of Japan and South Korea met on Thursday in a historic moment because it's the first time that a South Korean president has visited Japan in 12 years. The two countries, both allies of the US but with centuries of animosity between them, are increasingly being driven closer together by China's growing presence in world affairs and mutual security threats such as North Korea. Underlining that subject, North Korea launched another long-range ballistic missile that landed in the sea between the three countries just hours before President Yoon Suk-yeol arrived in Japan. This video released by Japan's defense ministry is believed to show the missile's contrail. Yoon and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida hashed out several new agreements in the visit, including tightening intelligence sharing and ending an almost 4-year dispute over raw materials used in high-tech equipment. The visit also came in the middle of joint military drills between South Korea and American forces. It's not clear if the warmth between the Japanese and South Korean governments will change opinions at home. A recent poll by Gallup Korea shows 64% of respondents there said there was no rush to improve ties with Tokyo without a change in Japan's attitude.
So, viewers, you just heard the recent geopolitical developments in East Asia, where Japan, South Korea and the US are closing ranks and trying to form some kind of a united front. So coming back to you, Professor Lim, you already talked about how South Korea's rise has been linked to China's economic linkages and the interdependence with China. But there is also this question about the US containment or / what the Chinese are calling encirclement or suppression strategy of China. And as a US ally, if you are getting closer and deeper into the Japan-US embrace and trying to form, doing more joint military exercises and force posturing and all those things, intelligence sharing, how would you then balance it with the need to continue to have friendly ties with China? The Indo-Pacific strategy of South Korea, unlike the Japanese and the Indian or even the US strategy, does in fact mentions China as a key partner and as a friendly country for peace and stability in Indo-Pacific. So there is some variance, isn't it? And how would you categorize South Korea's approach to China in light of these developments, especially the Yoon administration, the current administration, South Korea? The right wing seems to be more inclined to go along with the US, but then how do you then have the American friendship and also eat the Chinese cake?
Well, it's really a difficult time for South Korea-like country. Again, when superpowers, they are friendly to each other, that's the best time for a Korea-like country. But as we all know, I don't want to blame just one side, but just time goes by and things have changed. And now, again, we do see strategic competition, almost like a fatal competition between US and China. Again, China's role is huge in many ways to South Korea, not only just economically. Again, China is just bordering with us. Of course, between the two countries, we do have sea. But at the same time, China is bordering with the North Korea, which means when we try to resolve the North Korea-related issue without China's engagement, it will be almost like an impossible to solve the issue, any issue related to the North Korea. This is our reality. In that sense, we don't want to aggravate unnecessarily our dear friend, again, the China. But as long as this power restructuring, is ongoing, and as long as all this, arms races are getting more serious, we need to prioritize our security and deterrence capability first. So I hope, again, even though China will be pretty much, again, stimulated by all this kind of unity between US, Korea, Japan, or even Philippines, or who knows, if we touch on the Taiwan issue, if so, China will be, again, pretty much really sensitive to anything related to Taiwan as well. But, this is more like a kind of security dilemma situations for both. But, probably for South Korea, the best option is, again, we need to definitely secure our deterrence capability. And then we want to and we need to persuade China to help us, again, to solve the North Korean issues. Otherwise, all this arms race will be getting more and more serious or getting into just escalation.
Yeah, Professor Lim, understood. I mean, South Korea has its compulsions and it needs China. But on the other side, you know, the Yoon administration has been talking about aligning, if not joining, the Quad, which includes India, Japan, United States and Australia. There are some working groups under Quad on vaccines and on technology, critical and emerging technologies, on climate change and all these things, where the Yoon administration has been indicating, in fact it has been talking to India and saying that they want India's support for South Korea to play a bigger role in the Quad plus type mechanisms. And of course, as you know, Quad, whether they officially say it or not, unofficially it is a means to push back against what we in the Quad members see as a Chinese expansionism and aggression. So how would you characterize South Korea's, I mean, have they moved past the ambivalence and the ambiguity? Are they more convinced about the utility of Quad? And can that also help with the deterrence? I mean, I understand you need the US security umbrella for deterrence against North Korea. But then what about the broader role that you are envisaging for South Korea as it becomes bigger in the region? Can Quad be one means or vehicle through which South Korea can express itself and join into creative partnerships and have bigger influence in the region?
Sure. Again, if we recall our memory, when the then candidate, Mr. Yoon Suk-yeol, was elected, again, he made a phone call. Of course, the number one phone call went to the U.S., and then the second one went to Japan, and then the United Kingdom, and then Australia, and then the fifth was to India.
Yeah.
So except the UK, of course, UK does have another very interesting partnership. For example, AUKUS was another new military regime. But anyhow, except the United Kingdom, all these four countries are members of Quad, which indicated that the then elected current President Yoon Suk-yeol, his policy, even at the time, looked to prioritize these Quad countries, Quad member. Of course, Quad is domestically in this country is more controversial because the other group, the opposition group, will be very much concerned about, retaliation or anxiety, unnecessary escalation of the tension between the China and the others, or even over the Korean Peninsula. Definitely, we don't want that. But as you just mentioned, Quad is not only for just those military things. Again, it can cover climate change. I think this should be prioritized than many other issues. Because all these Asian countries are very much economically developing, but at the same time, which means we are consuming tremendously, huge amount of energy, which means again that we emit huge amount of carbon dioxide, all these, air pollutants, which means we definitely need to think about more sustainable development of the Asia.
Yes.
So definitely climate change issue should be and can be, I think, one big agenda among these, Quad or Quad plus partnership, or a public health issue, as you just mentioned. We all realize that as, international network is really important to deal with this overwhelming challenge like COVID-19 pandemic, or new technology too. As I said, power restructuring is ongoing, and global value chain is now going through the restructuring too. So we need to think about and we need to develop more sustainable network, value chain or value network in this region.
Yes.
So I think there are many long list of good agenda.
A lot of non-traditional security areas where South Korea could partner with Quad without any qualms, says Professor Eunjung. But viewers, let's now focus on a little more on the South Korea-India Special Strategic Partnership. I have a video statement from Dr. Titli Basu. She is an associate professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University and a specialist on East Asian studies. Let's hear her about the potential areas where South Korea and India can cooperate. Let's hear her and then come back to the discussion.
Sure. You know, there is a lot of opportunity for cooperation within India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which we announced, Prime Minister Modi announced in the East Asia Summit way back in 2019, and the 7 pillars. So I think one vertical on which we need to deepen the cooperation is the maritime domain awareness. We have our Information Fusion Center in the Indian Ocean region, and it's driven by the idea of, or the objective of, increasing situational awareness in maritime commons. So India is asking for support from offshore countries, and it would be great if South Korea can pitch in. I mean, one small step to start with is sending a liaison to the Fusion Center. South Korea is an indispensable player when it comes to a high-tech sector. So discussion on re-engineering supply chains need to deepen. What we can bring to the table and how we can take it forward is one theme that we really need to invest our diplomatic, political and energy on. India on its own has taken a lead on various global stages, whether it is the International Solar Alliance or Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, creating global low carbon pathways. So this is where Seoul can again pitch in and contribute to global initiatives. My fourth and final point is about building effective communication when it comes to defense industry cooperation. The strengths of South Korean in the defense industry, it has emerged as a prominent player in weapons export, and our status as a leading importer of arms stays. So kind of to kind of explore the synergies between the two countries. Regular and effective communication at the highest level and thorough understanding of the structures and policies are important. Cooperation in shipbuilding is vitally important. Private sector dialogue, I feel, can facilitate defense exports further, and India is focusing on joint ventures when it comes to it brings more value, whether it is transfer of technology or participation in defense exports. I think these things you will define the future tone of the relationship between the two countries.
So viewers, you heard Dr. Titli Basu talking about at least 4 areas where South Korea and India can cooperate. Coming back to Professor Lim, the thing is, Professor Lim, the South Korea-India bilateral trade has reached all-time high of almost $28 billion. And very interestingly, as Professor Basu was just mentioning in the video, defense exports from South Korea to India are rising. I was just looking up the data. After Russia, United States, France and Israel, South Korea has become the 5th largest, defense player in the Indian market. And the Indian Army is using the South Korean K9 artillery gun, for example. The Indian Navy is looking to get lots of components that will help build submarines and anti-torpedo warfare and these kinds of things. So very advanced areas where we are talking about defense cooperation. So this is an emerging area where South Korea has come in last few years, and it's been quite fascinating to see this change. So it's not only the non-traditional areas, but even hard security. India seems to be looking to South Korea for co-production and co-development of advanced weapons, and also on the other hand the critical technologies. We all know South Korea is a leader in semiconductors. Your companies like SK Hynix and Samsung are the world leaders in semiconductors, and that's another area where India is looking to bring in more foreign investment. So maybe there is potential for India and South Korea to cooperate there also, and these are in many ways very strategic, isn't it? I mean, they are not aimed at a third country. We are not trying to do this as a containment effort of anybody, about which South Korea is uncomfortable, but in effect they are also strengthening our hard power and our scientific and economic capabilities and increasing our overall power. So in that sense I think it's a win-win, isn't it? So your thoughts on what more South Korea and India can do to advance this positive trend?
This country, South Korea's economy its industry has been developing based on the two things. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, manufacturing and then export. And manufacturing, Korea's manufacturing, has been oriented from more like a strategic calculation. Otherwise, probably South Korea didn't come this way. For example, when again we made the POSCO like a steelmaking company, again probably the rest of the world was very much doubtful. Again, the South Korea back then was not that again developed enough to have that kind of heavy industry, but we did. The reason why we did was, again, that we always concerned about the security reason. Otherwise, probably we just chose to be more cost efficient, but we couldn't be like that way, as long as, again, the North Korea is threatening us all the time. So the reason why I mentioned this is, again, India and Korea, these two countries are trustable. This is more important than anything, I think. As long as we do have a trust between the Korea and India, we can develop further strategic all this, again, the industries, as you just mentioned, defense industry, semiconductor, definitely chips is almost like a war these days. So chips is definitely the area we can work together, or any other crucial new technology related industry, we can work together. Again, we can trust each other.
And we have the US initiative for a Chip 4 alliance that includes South Korea, Japan, and US and Taiwan. Let's see if India could join the Chip 4 alliance, and there are many possibilities there. But I want to thank Professor Eunjung Lim for sharing valuable insights about the South Korea-India relationship and also South Korea's expanding role in the Indo-Pacific. This is very, very vital. So viewers, thank you so much for joining on the show. I want to conclude by saying that South Korea is a very important country, and South Korea cannot be underestimated. And we just heard from Professor Eunjung Lim of Kongju National University about how South Korean technology, know-how, and also intent to become a more proactive player is remaking the world. Thank you, Professor Lim. Thank you so much for being on Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you for having me.
So viewers, that's it from me on this occasion, but do think about middle powers which are ambitious and which have got a lot of extraordinary economic and technological prowess like South Korea, how they can be valuable to Indian foreign policy. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.